So let's imagine that Gavin's Rings is going well and I start to thinking about expanding. And you want to join me, or I have a couple of friends who want to join me in the business. Then what might arise is actually a partnership. And what's a partnership? We'll get into the technical definition in a minute, but a partnership is where you've got two or more people and they're directly operating and owning a business together. One way to think about it is, it's like a group of sole traders. So that means, super importantly, that there's no separate legal entity. The only legal entities are the partners, which means, from a legal perspective, each of those partners are principals and agents of each other under agency law. You remember agency law allows you to scale contracts. So what that means is all of the partners can enter contracts on behalf of the other partners. They're not entering the contract on behalf of the partnership. That's a really important one, because what it means is each of the partners has unlimited personal liability for what goes on in that business. Let me work with a little diagram to help us think this through. So we'll remember that in a sole trader, it's the person's business. So in terms of Gavin's Big Ring, it's me who actually does all the contracting, etc. But just say I get you and I get my mum to join me in this business. We might keep the name Gav's Rings, but we have this thing which is a partnership. But really the partnership isn't a legal entity. It can't do or be responsible for anything. What actually happens is the three of us, you, me and my mum, are all agents and principals of each other. What does that mean? Well, okay, we already know that I've gone out and I am buying metal from our metal supplier, and I'm also buying tools from Bunnings. So I will have a contract with these particular suppliers, right? So I enter a contract to buy something at Bunnings, or I enter a contract for the business to buy some metal. And you'll know that as a sole trader, I have to pay that. But if I don't have the money, because I am your agent, you'll have to pay the money if I can't. If the business can't pay and I can't pay, you have to pay. That's the key to understanding what's going on in a partnership. We are all principals and agents of each other. So even if I do something crazy, just say I go out and I buy a $10,000 coffee machine for the business, and even if you haven't agreed to it, because I am your agent, you'll be liable for the $10,000 coffee machine. And we know that from apparent authority last week, etc. Provided it meets those kind of rules and this is being bought for the kind of business. So you're on the hook for all of the dodgy things that I do, or the dodgy things my mum does, or my mum's on the hook for what you do, etc., right? That's what's going on when we have mutual agency under a partnership. There is no separate legal entity of the partnership. We're all principals and agents of each other. Now, what makes it even crazier is because this is a contract, and we know from contract law, you don't need it to be in writing. So you can end up in a partnership, theoretically, and not so theoretically, even if you don't mean to. How would that happen? Just say I come to you and say, hey, I got this gig where I'm making rings, selling them at the markets. You want to be involved? And you say, yeah, that sounds good. And you start helping me make them, and you maybe work at the shop, and you maybe work at the stall in West End and do the selling, and I spend my time making them, and we work together and we decide what we're going to do, and we're going to expand to another market, etc. We're in a partnership, whether or not we agreed. So if I go and buy the coffee machine, you're on the hook. Why? Because a partnership can be implied partly or wholly by conduct. Wholly by conduct, right? If we're carrying on a business in common with a view to a profit, so we're operating a business, running this ring thing out of West End, two, in common, we're doing it together, we're making these decisions together, yep, with a view to a profit, that's why we're selling the rings to make money. We got a partnership. And you're on the hook for what I do, and I'm on the hook for what you do. So you can see why, even if you're never going to really operate a partnership, it's important to know what it is, because you could unintentionally end up one, particularly early on in your career when you may be starting some new ventures, etc. If you definitely want to enter a partnership, then you should write it down, like all major contracts. We learnt that out of contract when we did that. But you don't necessarily need to have one. All you need to do is to meet the definition. The definition is originally set out in common law, but we're going to deal with Section 5 of the Partnership Act in Queensland. You've got to be carrying on a business in common with a view to a profit. Hit those three things, all three things, you're in a partnership. Okay, so if you're doing it for charitable purposes, it's not a partnership. It's not with a view to a profit. If you're doing a one-off venture, maybe you're just going to cater for one music festival. You're going to cook the food, they're going to sell it, or you're cooking and doing it together, but you're just doing it once for one festival. You're not carrying on a business. So there's got to be repetition of business. Notice the difference when we're selling rings at the market. I'm going back each week to do it. Even though it only happens once a week, there's a repetition to that business. So we're carrying on a business with a view to a profit, and we've got to be doing it together. We've both got to be involved in the decision making. Provided you meet that definition, those three things are occurring, you're in a partnership. Section 5 of the Partnership Act. So one of these areas where it's most tricky is probably this one of carrying on a business. So there does need to be continuity or repetition of activities. So for instance, if 10 of us get together to buy Bitcoin, then that's not carrying on a business. If we were trading, so buying and selling Bitcoin, then it would be a partnership, right? It's not really about the Bitcoin, right? It's about, are you doing something ongoing, trading, buying and selling, or are you just buying something once? Same thing, if you and I buy and renovate one house, we're not in a partnership. But if we buy and renovate houses in an ongoing basis, then we're in a partnership. There has to be this continuity, not a single project, okay, this ongoing activity. In terms of carrying on a business in common, we're acting on behalf of each other, and we've got to be doing it to make money. There are some other legal issues. Generally, you can only have 20 partners in a general partnership, but we won't get into that nitty-gritty. Just understand the basics. Carrying on a business in common with a view to a profit, you're in a partnership. Now, where this can get really tricky is around this issue of joint ventures. I bring this up because it doesn't matter what you call something. Just like it doesn't matter under vicarious liability whether you call someone an employee or not. You can call someone a contractor. Your contract of employment with them can talk about them being an independent contractor. But the law has tests, and if you meet the test, the name doesn't matter. The same thing for a joint venture. So sometimes people or even companies decide to get together to work with each other, and they think, well, what we'll do is we'll call it a joint venture so we don't have this mutual liability. But if you meet that test we just talked about, carrying on business in common with a view to a profit, you'll be in a partnership. Well, what's the difference between a partnership and a joint venture then? There's no legal thing. There's no distinct legal entity of joint venture. It's more a contract or a commercial arrangement between two people who have agreed to work together towards a project, an outcome, an objective. So we're going to renovate this house. That's our objective. And we're working together, but we're remaining independent. The key marker is probably it's a singular objective or outcome that we're after, rather than a continuity of business. It's one of the most difficult, uncertain areas. If you ever want to get involved in anything to do with a joint venture, etc., you need to see lawyers, and they are found more commonly in certain industries like mining, where a joint venture can be in place to set up a mine, if that makes sense. So you get the idea that it's this singular objective rather than ongoing business. Even though it's regularly mining, it's the objective of the mine, etc. That's why you need lawyers involved, etc., to really understand the difference, because if you don't, You could be in a partnership when you think you're in a joint venture, and it doesn't matter what you wrote down. Now, since a partnership, if you want to enter one, is actually a form of a contract and a very important contract, it's important that you do write it down, that you don't leave things to chance. So what should you put in a partnership agreement? Let's have a look. Okay, very clearly you want to identify who the partners are, their rights, responsibilities and duties. For instance, how decision making occurs. You might want to specify that in the agreement, how you're going to resolve any disputes that might occur, and how you're going to change the rules of the partnership if you have to. So generally, a good partnership agreement is going to have the names of the partners, the name of the partnership, what business you're in, how long it's going to be there, what each partner is bringing to it, how you're going to share profits, what authority you have, how you make decisions, duties, obligations, how do new people join partnerships? How does a partner leave the actual partnership, and how are you going to resolve disputes? Think of it this way. You're going to be working with these people for a long time on something that's super important. You want to think about what could go wrong and specify how you can minimize the chances of that occurring. So you want to work out, how are you going to decide it when you have differences of opinion? How are you going to resolve things when you have disputes? How can someone leave? How can someone join? How are we going to split the money if we actually start making money, etc.? And you want to think about those problems before they're actually here. A bit like doing a group project, right? The more you can do some pre-planning and agreement about who's going to do what and who should do what by when, it doesn't guarantee it's going to be smooth sailing, but it will be a lot more smooth sailing than if you don't do that. And if you've done that, you then have the law to back you up as a safety net if people don't follow through on what they said they'd do, unlike a group project. Anyway, let's not get sidetracked with group projects. So I'll leave you to look over this slide. I've been talking here about general partnerships. There are other forms of partnerships that have evolved over time, but we're not going to spend a lot of time on them. I'll leave you to look them over. So we end up here with our advantages and disadvantages. What exactly are they when we're talking about a partnership? Because a partnership is kind of a group of sole traders, person 1, 2 and 3 coming together, you actually don't need many formalities. Again, it's easy and it's low cost. Generally, and you don't even have to have it, you want that partnership agreement or contract to establish those rights, etc. You get more people. Now, it's not just limited. You have more people for ideas, for skills, even for capital, right? If 3 people can go on a loan, you can borrow more money, for instance. And you also get privacy. You don't have to register with the government. Of course, there are exceptions like GST and business names, and a little bit more in terms of a tax file number and an annual return for the partnership. But the information and compliance costs are limited. However, the big kicker, remember, you're all agents and principals of each other, which of course means you have unlimited personal liability, even if you haven't authorised your other partners to enter into a contract or if they do something stupid under negligence. Additionally, now there's multiple people, you've got multiple owners, so your control and decision-making authority starts to decrease. And you really want to make sure that you trust the people you enter a partnership with because of that unlimited liability agency relationship. We also have the same problem as from a sole trader because the partnership doesn't own property and the partnership doesn't really contract with anyone. The partners jointly own anything and contract on that, so it can be difficult to sell the particular business, even if you all agree that you want to sell that business. So you can see partnership is a bit like a scaled up sole trader with a few people involved. With that scaling up, you scale up your liability because you're personally liable for what the other partners do. And you also maintain many of the downsides, right? You maintain that downside of unlimited personal liability as well as the inability to actually exit the business easily. It can be a little bit easier to exit the business because you might be able to get someone else to join the partnership and buy you out under an agreed way. So you're moving more towards an ability to scale, but there's still significant limitations because there's not a separate legal entity. But where there is a separate legal entity is when we get into the corporate form, a corporation. And that's a particularly important form that we're going to get to. But just before we do it, there's one other form, one other non-legal entity form we want to deal with, and that's something you might have heard of, a trust.